I thought for a long time that adulthood is when you know how not to confuse "I'm fine" with "I can handle anything." 4 months with Jay have shown that I'm just learning. We met in a funny way. He was standing in uniform at the coffee machine, squinting, trying to read the menu as if it didn't say latte and Americano, but a secret order 10 pages long. He spoke softly, laughed with a delay, as if the laughter had its own parachute, and all the time adjusted his sleeve where his watch rubbed his skin. The first truly kind guy in my life, the first one I took to my own. And I'm his first in everything. His first girlfriend, the first one he showed to his family. There's tenderness in this, and a burden like a new glass service. Beautiful, but you're afraid to breathe. I agreed to go to his mother almost without a pause. Fair enough. He tolerated my noisy gatherings several times, awkward conversations with my aunt. She always asks about the child's prospects after 2 days of meeting. Helped Dad carry bags of earth at the dacha. It's time for me to get acquainted too, I said, and he smiled like a boy who was trusted to hold a box of cake. His mother's house greeted me with the smell of warm laundry detergent and fried onions. On the porch hung a hanging basket of plastic flowers, so bright purple that it seemed like a joke. On the door was a heart-shaped magnet with the inscription, "Home is where Mom is." Her operation made itself known only by a white strip of bandage peeking out from under her house t-shirt. She walked cheerfully like a person who knows where everything is and in which drawer someone stuck the scissors. The first evening went smoothly. Jay and I went to the store. Mom made a list for the house. Napkins, a filter for the faucet, light bulbs. Jay joked with the cashier, and she smiled at him the way they smile at people in uniform. He also put a couple of small surprises for me in the cart, a funny dolphin keychain and soft pajamas with peaches. An early gift, he said guiltily. I can't wait. I love this simplicity in him, how happy he is when he guesses my little wishes, as if he puts notes in my pocket. I heard. At home, I pulled my pajamas out of the bags, waved them, and then he, like a child who had just drawn a picture, pulled me toward my mother. Look, Mom, she liked it. Mom took one look and said, "Aw, that's so cute," and then hugged him. He hugged back, and she, looking at me over his shoulder, said, "Where's money?" I giggled nervously. It seemed like a joke, but the smiley hung in the air between us like sticky tape. Jay blushed and shrugged. "She likes to joke," he whispered later in the kitchen. I swallowed this explanation like hot tea, scalding myself, but pretending that it was normal. When the woman on whom everything in this house depends jokes, you have little space for your own reaction. After dinner, we went out onto the porch. Mom suggested relaxing, and we lit a joint. Twilight tied wires in the sky into a tight bundle. Neighbors were arguing somewhere 2 yards away, and I told her what I love about her son. How he calls if I write tired, how he moves his chair, how he listens without unraveling the answer in his head in advance. I spoke for real, and she listened somehow past nodding, looking into the dark space between the houses where there was nothing but the wind. "That's good," she answered briefly. "I think you're good for my son." The words are correct, but the intonation is like an empty box. There is a form but no content. Her gaze clung to anything, to the light bulb by the door, to my knee, to the cuff of his sweatshirt, just not to me. I attributed it to fatigue, to the operation, to the weather, to the fact that I am a new figure in a long-established system. I am conscientious in making excuses. I can come up with an excuse for the house, even if it falls down. That night, Jay and I were watching something stupid on the couch, arguing funny about the taste of chips. He leaned over to kiss me, and at that moment a voice came from his mother's bedroom. "Jay, can you help me for a sec?" The tone was not a request, but an alarm clock. He immediately stood up. "Just a sec, babe." He returned 10 minutes later. "We should have moved the box." We moved closer again, and again. "Jay?" The third time I was no longer laughing. Inside, there was a feeling like someone was putting marks on a map. "You can't do this here." And each mark was her voice. He called himself a mama's boy beforehand. "She's all I've got." I wanted to respect that. Respect for someone else's love is an important thing. But where there is love, there is crowding. And in crowding, people either learn to breathe in turns or begin to steal air. On the second day, he took me around his places: a low dam where local teenagers draw hearts on the concrete, a 24-hour bakery where coffee comes in paper cups with a pseudo-Latin motto printed on it, an empty park where in early autumn the leaves seem to bend into boats on their own. We laughed, and it was easy. He turned into the jewelry store so suddenly that I thought he knew someone inside. But no, it was just an impulse. "I want," he said at the display case. It was cold inside, as if they were storing ice instead of jewelry. He looked at me as if he was checking to see if I would be scared. I wasn't scared. It wasn't an engagement, not noise, not fanfare. It was a small private vow. "I choose you today, we'll see tomorrow. But today, definitely." He tried on different ones for me, and when he found the one, his breathing was ragged, as if he was running. It was touching to the point of stupidity. We got home, he held my hand up like a trophy, not like a firefly in a jar, to shine but to protect, and took it to show my mother. She met us at the kitchen door, one shoulder leaning against the doorframe, a coffee stain on her lips. He put his arm around her, showing her my hand, and she, without changing her position, said, "You know what I'm going to ask you, Jay. Where's Miney?" I felt my face betray me. My eyebrows were pulled up, my lips were turned inward as if I was chewing paper. He giggled sheepishly, muttered something about jokes, and my mother finally looked straight at me. And with that look, not even a hard one, but a businesslike one, she measured the distance. "You are a guest. I am home." In the evening, I twisted the ring on my finger for a long time. It unexpectedly fit. As if I had always had a place for this little thing, it was just empty. I lay there listening to the sounds in the house, the washing machine, the TV, her steps, his steps, and I thought that love is not when you are allowed to do everything, but when you feel where your boundaries are and where others are. But how can you talk about boundaries with a person who has been used to being called all his life and coming? After midnight, I went down to the kitchen to get water. In the dark, the house seemed more honest. No smiles, no awe, just cabinets that know which hinge they creak on. I poured water, and at that moment, Jay came out of the hallway. He wasn't expecting me. On his face was a guilty shadow, like a child who ate jam. "Are you awake?" I asked. "Mom called," he answered. He said called as if it were a natural law, like rain. We stood in silence, listening to the refrigerator. He touched my finger, the one with the ring, and slowly ran his thumb over it. "Listen," he said finally, "don't be mad, okay? It's just tomorrow at breakfast. Maybe you could take it off while we're here. It's just so as not to upset Mom." The water in the glass suddenly became thick, like syrup. I swallowed, as if someone could steal a sip from me, so as not to upset my mother. And who would steal it from me? I looked at him, and he looked away toward the sink. "It won't last long," he added quickly. "When we get back to your place, you'll put it on right away." I promise. I stood in his mother's kitchen, on the ill-fated sticky tape between joke and rule, and thought that adulthood probably begins with very simple phrases, with one that does not fit in the throat. I touched the ring, felt the cold metal and the smooth indentation on the skin, like the mark of a pen with which I had been writing the same thing for a long time. "Okay," I said, slowly pushing my voice out. "I'll think about it in the morning." And in the morning, when I went into the kitchen, my mother was already sitting with a shopping list and a mug. On the mug was printed "Number 1 Mom." She looked up, slid her eyes over my fingers, and smiled the way you smile when you win a little game. I left the ring on the bedside table, and while it lay there, small and quiet, for the first time in our history, I felt as if someone had just moved me from one shelf to another, without my consent. And at that moment, Jay's phone, left on the table, lit up with an incoming message from Mom. "Don't forget what we talked about boundaries." I froze with the circle from the cup in my palm and realized that the conversation I had been running from had already found me. I stared at the screen, at boundaries, as if the word itself could explain whose boundaries I was talking about. The phone flickered, the screen went dark, and the kitchen went gray again. The jagged tiles, the crumb-smeared table, the Mar1 Mom mug. I picked at the edge of the paper napkin with my fingernail and thought that even the air in this house was packed. Everything was labeled, everything was in its place, and any new object had to know in advance where it belonged. The ring lay on top, a small circle that somehow seemed too big for this kitchen. At breakfast, Mom read the shopping list. She had the voice of a woman who knows how to plan someone else's day, even without a question mark at the end. After lunch, Jay will go get a package, and we need batteries, and the shelf in the pantry is sagging, or else it will fall, God forbid. She said, "will fall," looking at me as if warning me about gravity. I nodded. Jay sat next to me and thoughtfully pushed the toe of his sneaker into the leg of a chair, as if he was trying to loosen the furniture, since he couldn't loosen the rules. There was no ring on my finger, and my mother was the first to notice. She didn't smile, her lips just relaxed a little, like someone who's finally found the light switch. "How did you sleep?" she asked, as if checking to see if I'd broken any other silent agreements. "Okay," I said, and I felt like I was lying. Sleeping by someone else's rules is like lying in a bed with someone else's sheets. Clean, but not yours. The three of us went to the store. The radio was playing in the car. Hits, where the refrains are repeated like approval. "You're doing everything right." Mom sat in front, pointing out the turn in advance, even when the car was standing still. At the checkout, Jay secretly put my favorite chocolate bar in the basket, looked at me as if he was helping me breathe. Mom put two identical candles, vanilla with lavender, next to each other and said, "One for me, one for you." It sounded almost like an oath, to divide everything in half, including air. At home, I suggested making dinner, pasta with garlic and herbs. I wanted to do something simple in my own, to leave a mark that wouldn't wash off after the first rain. Mom allowed it, but stood next to me and, without touching my body, moved me in the right direction with her hands. Salt, in the top cabinet, onion, thinner, board, for vegetables, green. "No, not this one, for bread. This is how we do it." "This is how we do it" is always about "you don't do this." I tried not to drop any of these silent correct, although everything inside me was ringing, "Why don't my correct count?" After lunch, Mom went into her room to rest. Jay and I tiptoed out into the backyard, where an old maple tree lay in the shade, and the grass smelled like it had been doused with vanilla from candles. "Listen," he began, "about the ring. She's okay with it. It's just, she's having a hard time, the surgery, you know, and I'm her everything. I don't want her to—" He trailed off, and I thought, "to feel like she's being changed." He nodded, as if I'd guessed the password. "And the message?" I asked without saying the name. He sighed. She talked to me. She said that everything is fast between us, that we need boundaries, that home is our home, and we shouldn't demonstrate." The word "demonstrate" sounded as if we had shown something obscene in the square. "She said," he continued, "that you're good. It's just that she has her own—" He fell silent again. "Right," I prompted. He didn't smile. I told him about my correct. How at my house my mother always puts a cheap tablecloth on the table, for guests, and laughs at herself every time because "for guests" is who we are. How my father doesn't like garlic in salad, but eats it because that's how she likes it. How my grandfather lived alone for many years after my grandmother's death and was acutely upset by every visit, not because he didn't want company, but because the house likes it when people know where the cups are. Boundaries are not about not letting anyone in. They are about not losing the walls. Jay listened, nodded, leaned his whole body towards me, as he does when he really wants to understand. "I don't want you to leave," he said quietly. "And I don't want her to think that I'm leaving her. Can we find a middle ground?" At the middle ground, his voice trembled as if it were thin ice. I nodded. "But the middle ground is when both of us are moving?" He closed his eyes for a second, as if he had turned something off inside him. "You feel like in a house. Suddenly the lights go out in one room. I went to my mother with tea and sweets, like an ambassador of a small truce, knocked on the half-open door. The room smelled of a pharmacy and perfume that remembers the beginning of the 2000s. sweet without shame. Mom was lying on her side, looking at the TV with the sound muted. Can I? I asked. Of course, she answered, and an almost imperceptible finally flashed in her eyes. I put the cup down. I wanted to say thank you for accepting me, and I stumbled. It's important to me that we respect each other. I love your son very much. I see, said Mom. She didn't look away. He's good. He's too good. He's always been. She raised herself up on her elbow a little. You're his first. It's not easy for everyone. I understand, I said. She nodded. You're great that you found each other, but I ask you not to rush. He's emotional. He worries more than he lets on. And when he's at home, I'd like him to rest without changes. At the word changes, she looked at my hand where the ring had still been in the morning. I'm not against your... She searched for the word. Decision, it's just, everything should happen in its own time and not here. She smiled a small smile, the one they practice in front of the mirror. You understand, right? I understand, responded automatically. In fact, I felt that a piece of me was disappearing from my I understand, like from a photo from which a person was carefully cut out, and they said that the frame was cleaner this way. In the evening, her friend came over, Aunt Karen, although she is not my aunt at all. A woman with a loud laugh and earrings that jingle when you speak loudly nearby. Karen hugged Jay, pushed me with her elbow to the sink, and said to Mom, Look, I said, he is too kind. He has always been. Who, if not Mom, understands? Dinner was held in the we mode. We were worried, we treated, we try, we will cope. Sometimes I smiled at the wrong time because I was afraid that I would forget that I should smile. When the guests left, Mom started cleaning. I offered to help, she waved. Rest. But then she called, Jay, the trash. Зрение, Jay, посмотри на кран. Зрение, Jay, есть ли отчет об страховании в папке? He ran between the rooms like a courier at rush hour. I stood at the sink, washing the same plate, and at some point I realized that the spinning circle of water reminded me of my ring on the nightstand. Both are objects that are now not here. Before going to bed, he sat on the edge of the bed. She's really trying, he said, as if he was justifying her to me or me to her. Me too, I replied. He ran his finger down my forearm and quietly added, You're not instead of, okay, you're together. And that was the most tender thing that could be said in a house where the word together had long been someone else's. I woke up at night from the sound of a door slamming downstairs. I looked at the phone. 1:30. Silence as paper. I thought I must have imagined it. But footsteps confirmed. Someone had gone into the kitchen. I wanted to turn over and go back to sleep, but the water in the glass from the kitchen seemed to be calling my name. I slowly went downstairs. The kitchen was softly lit. Mom was standing at the stove in her robe, her back to me, heating milk in a small saucepan and writing something in a notebook. Jay's phone was lying on the table next to her. Can't sleep? I asked. She flinched just a little, the kind of person who always hears you when you come in. No, she smiled. It's my age, you know. She poured milk into a cup and added honey. Want some? I shook my head. She sat down opposite, placed her palm on the table, her fingers straight as if on a ruler. I'm thinking about how things will be for you in the future. You're a smart girl, you see everything, he's kind. He doesn't know how to say no. He needs help with this, and I'm helping, I'll help. There was no threat in her voice, only confidence in her own role. I'm not an enemy, she added quietly. It's just, I have boundaries too. She smiled slightly, nodded at the mug, number 1 Mom, and the house and the sun. I stood there listening to the clock ticking, and I knew I wouldn't win anything now, either by arguing or by being gentle. I hear you, she said. Thank you, she replied, as if we had made a deal. When I got back upstairs, Jay was gone, and then I remembered the sound of the door, not the kitchen, but the front door. A minute later he came in, barefoot with cold air on his skin. Where are you going? I asked. Take out the trash. He said, at night? He shrugged. She asked. I laughed, briefly and ugly. Sometimes laughter is the only thing that doesn't break if you step on it. Later, when he fell asleep, I lay with my eyes open and my head open accordingly. A draft of thoughts swirled inside. Say, wait, escape. These three words always argue over who is more important. I thought about the fourth, ask, but it was the hardest to pronounce in this house. I closed my eyes and promised myself that in the morning we would leave early. To the city, to the bakery with the pseudo-Latin seal, to the park where the leaves themselves bend into boats. It's easier to talk there. In the morning, the plan fell apart with my mother's first phrase. Jay, don't forget. You have to pick up your documents from the clinic at noon. I signed you up, and you about the shelf in the storage room. He nodded. I looked at him. What about our exit? He hesitated. Let's do it after the clinic. For a while, then we'll come back. I nodded, but inside me, after sounded like never. We broke out anyway. For an hour, the bakery smelled of cinnamon and half-baked hope. We sat by the window and I finally said, I can't stand this. I need you to tell her that we have us and that we is not a show, it's a fact. He listened seriously without defense. I'll tell you, he promised. His promises always sounded like a formation, a precise step, the same turn of the head. Today? I clarified. He nodded. Today, by evening, something had changed in his eyes, a tiredness that resembled agreement with something unpleasant. Mom was sitting in the living room, clicking the remote control. Mom, he said, can we talk? I went upstairs, deciding not to stand over them like a teacher. In the room, I saw the ring on the nightstand again. It lay there so calmly that I felt ashamed of my anxiety. I took it in my palm and felt the cold remove the heat from my forehead. Let them talk, I said to myself. Give them their we. Then there will be room for ours. A muffled conversation came from below, the words indistinct, like blur in a photograph. I caught a few. Speed, home, peace, respect. Then quieter, a pause, and my mother's voice. If she loves you, she'll understand. I held my breath, pressed my ear to the doorframe. The voices came closer again. She'll understand. And even quieter, barely audible. If anything, I will return the ring. The air around me collapsed like a plastic bag. The ring in my palm suddenly became unbearable, as if our entire history were sitting on its tiny circumference. I kept my eyes on the metal, and the sofa creaked below. Someone had stood up, and the next second I heard my mother whisper, "Good boy." And he replied, "I just don't want any trouble." The door handle twitched. Someone came up the stairs. I didn't have time to put the ring back. It was Jay. He stopped in the doorway, like a man who suddenly saw his reflection where he didn't expect it. In my palms lay what he had wanted to hide a few hours ago. The ring. He looked at it, then at me, and took a deep breath, as if trying to figure out which way to fall so as not to hurt. "You're holding him," he said quietly, almost with relief, as if he saw that I hadn't run away yet. "And you're returning him," I answered. The words came out calm as water, but somewhere inside me there were cart horses moving. He sat down on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, palms clasped. I knew this pose. This is how he sits before a start, not a military one, but one of his own domestic trifles. To talk, to settle, to pretend that nothing happened. "I didn't say I'd return it," he began. I said, "if anything." "That sounds different." "If anything is when you have already prepared two scenarios in your head," I answered, "and one of them is without me." He blinked. I saw thoughts jumping behind his eyes. "Explain. Calm down. Don't offend." For a long time, I was ready to live in this compromise factory of his, where everything is wrapped in soft paper so that no one gets hurt. But now the paper is wet, stuck to my fingers. He hesitated. "She's worried. She says everything is fast, that she needs time and that home is a place where nothing should change shape." "And people?" I asked. "Do people have the right to change shape? Or should we freeze while the house watches?" He squeezed his fingers tighter. There was something boyish about it, not from weakness, but from a habit of self-control. He was taught to be needed, collected, predictable. I loved this about him and hated it at such moments. I don't want to choose, he finally said. I want you both. He broke off because together was already taken in this house. Don't choose. I nodded. Choose yourself and say it out loud. This will be our choice. He looked at the ring. Put it on, I said, and felt my voice tremble with my own courage. Right now, and we'll go down. And you'll tell her, this is a fact. Not a demonstration, not a challenge. A fact. He smiled painfully. Did you hear? That's enough, I replied. There was silence, alive like an animal in the room. It catches every movement. He reached for my hand, carefully grasped my fingers, as if the ring was not metal, but a living thing that could be frightened. He slowly put it on. The metal fell into place, as if it had never been removed. We both exhaled. It was a short, unexpected moment of peace. Let's go, he said, and added, as always, I'm nearby. On the stairs, the steps creaked like a debate. In the living room, Mom was sitting on the sofa, propped up with pillows, the remote control on her knee. In the corner, a lamp with a flowered shade flickered. It gave off a warm, honest light in which faces become what they are. Her gaze when we entered was direct and, for the first time in a long time, deliberately ready. Mom, Jay began, I need to tell you. She turned her head towards him and not immediately toward me. For a second I became a background, like a stool next to the door. We bought a ring, he said. I gave it to you. It's not an engagement, but... He searched for words, and I saw the air fluttering in his chest, smooth as a windless flag. But it's important. For us. I want us to be able to be ourselves at home too, without hiding places. Silence. It can be different, inviting, evaluating, destructive. It was accounting. In my mother's head, the abacus clicked. She laid out our words in columns. Assets, liabilities, unforeseen circumstances. At home, she repeated. At home. An interesting word. She smiled with one corner of her lips. I'm glad you found someone to give to. The right to give. You always had the right to show. I'm not sure that at home. She looked at my hand. But I asked for time and silence in my home. And in my body is my hand. I said calmly, and to my own surprise, heard how it didn't sound aggressive. And my feeling is mine. I can't leave it at the door like shoes. Mom didn't flinch. Mom knew how not to flinch. It's subtle, she said. But we agreed. She nodded to Jay. That you would think about it, not to rush. What will happen later? In your house, do as you please. Here, I need... She searched for a soft word and couldn't find it. Order. Order is when things are in their places, I answered, and people are in their relationships. I don't rearrange your shelves, but you rearrange mine. She looked calmly, like a surgeon at a picture. Then she lightly touched the remote control, as if she wanted to change the channel but didn't. We need to get used to it, she said finally. For him, to responsibility. For you, to our family system. I spent 40 years building it from what was there. Something like fatigue flashed in her voice. From insurance, shifts, unturned taps, night trips to the clinic. From Mom, where are you? And Mom, help. And now a man comes and says, we have a fact. She smiled softly. A fact is when the check is paid and the refrigerator works and the shelf doesn't fall. A fact is when two adult loves can live side by side, I answered. Not instead of each other, but with each other. If that's impossible, it's not a home. It's a museum. Jay was silent. I felt him being pulled both ways. He was a bridge, and bridges have a breaking point. Let's take a break, he said finally. And I shuddered. Break is a word that often hides the end. I mean, he got tangled up in his own commas. Don't take it off, no. Just, let's spend the night in a motel tonight so that everyone feels better. And tomorrow... He looked at Mom. We'll stop by and I'll help with the shelf, and then we'll go to our place. He took a breath. We need space, Mom. The word space hung in the room like a soap bubble. Beautiful, but is it strong enough? Mom nodded slightly as if this was a test and she agreed to conduct it. Of course, she said. If it's easier that way, I'm not a monster. She smiled. A girl needs to rest too. And she added without changing her expression, just Jay, leave the ring here on the table so it doesn't get lost on the way. I clenched my fingers. Not because I was afraid of losing from the meaning of leave it here, like with tickets at the entrance. Knives, umbrellas, my own feelings. No, Jay said quietly, and for a second I believed in miracles. It's in place. I'm not insisting, Mom answered softly. It's just, we have a lot to do. You know, the documents, the clinic, I'm worried. She looked at me and put her hand on my chest. My heart is racing because of this whole... She looked away. Situation. And very quickly, too quickly, so that you won't have time to understand where pity is and where calculation is. She pushed a small velvet box towards us. Let me hold it here. It's safe. The box was empty. I had the ring after all, but her gesture had everything. Trust, control, power to shift. We'll hold it ourselves, I said. Thank you. She nodded and lowered her hand. To be honest, I admired her self-control. Anyone else would have rolled her eyes and raised her voice. She didn't. She smothered the cup with a smile. We went up to the room to pack our things. Jay was silent. He carefully folded my pajamas with Peach's exercise cosmetic bag. The action calmed me. No, I don't know what's right, he said, almost in a whisper. It seems to me that in any scheme someone will be offended. I don't want it to be you. I don't want it to be her. And I don't have enough hands to hold both boats when they part. Then don't hold me, I replied. Build a pier, and tell me what the rules are on this pier. If you can't stand next to me there, tell me. I'll leave myself. I looked at him. But being silent isn't a rule. It's cowardice, Jay. The words came out harsher than I expected, and I wanted to hide from them myself. But it was too late. He wasn't offended. He nodded, and for the first time in 2 days, I saw maturity in his face. Not the ostentatious military one, but the kind that makes the voice lower. You're right. We took our backpacks and went down. Mom was standing in the hallway. She wasn't interfering, but she didn't leave either. A slight smile, her arms crossed like a person on duty, to conduct and remember. I left you some sandwiches, she said, in case you get hungry. And Jay, don't forget that tomorrow at 10. I know, he interrupted softly. Tomorrow I'll manage myself. She nodded, and for the first time something in her gaze flickered. Not anger, more like anxiety. She looked at me. Take care of him. He takes everything to heart. Me too, she answered. And myself. We went out. The air outside was cool. Honest, nobody's on the way to the motel. Jay held my hand as if checking my pulse. We silently checked into an impersonal room with a standard picture on the wall. A boat at the dock at dawn, what an irony. White sheets with steam. We turned on the air conditioner, and for the first time in days, silence was not an enemy. I stood by the window and looked at the parking lot for a long time. Cars, a lamp, the insects that beat against the light. When you are in a strange city and a strange house, even the parking lot is like a neutral zone. Here, no one imposes other people's rules on you, and no one has promised to love you on condition. Tell me, I turned to him, if she said either she or me, what would you do? That's not a fair question, he sighed, because she won't say that. And if he says? He sat on the edge of the bed, looked at his palms. I knew. Sometimes honesty is not the answer. This pause before him, I don't want to live by ultimatums, he said finally. But if I have to choose between being a grown man next to you and being a boy forever next to her? He looked up at me. I hope I'll choose the first. I'm trying. Try tomorrow, I said. Not someday. Tomorrow in the morning, no if. He nodded. I woke up that night to the vibration of his phone. He was asleep, and the screen lit up the room with a pale light. Message from Mom. Just don't do anything on principle. Love is a compromise, remind her. I put the phone on the nightstand. Didn't open it, didn't answer. Just felt a wave of fatigue rise up inside me, thick as soup in the cafeteria. Nourishing, but you can't take it anymore. In the morning, we went back to finally pick up my things and to talk, as promised. In the car, he gripped the steering wheel so tightly that the skin around his knuckles turned white. I looked at his profile and thought that love, perhaps, really is not choosing a person and closing your eyes. It is opening your eyes and continuing to choose. Yourself, too. The house greeted us with silence. There was no mug on the porch, no slipper in the hallway. Inside, there was only the smell of her perfume and that same heart-shaped magnet on the door. Home is where Mom is. It's strange, but in the empty house, this phrase sounded calmer. We went upstairs to pack. I reached the nightstand where the ring had been the day before and mechanically checked it. Habit empty. I turned around, and at that moment, the lock downstairs clicked. The door opened and we heard voices. Mom's and someone else's man's mom laughed the way people laugh when they say, "Well, imagine." The man's voice answered confidently, dryly. "An insurance agent," Jay whispered, "or—" and fell silent. The steps creaked. Mom appeared in the doorway, holding a folder in her hands, and behind her was a man in a formal shirt and with a suitcase. She looked at us and smiled without a trace of fatigue. "Great, you're home. We need to discuss something," she said, and put the folder on the bed, carefully pushing my backpack aside. "It concerns—" Her gaze fell on my hand. She noticed the ring, looked up at me, and as if nothing had happened, added, "Your common plans." "What other common?" Jay asked, and for the first time in days his voice sounded like, "No, not Thorne's iron." The man with the suitcase coughed and opened the folder. On the top sheet, I saw the clinic's seal. The second sheet was insurance. The third was payment calculation. In the left corner were numbers too big to be about anything mundane. "It's a simple question," Mom said, like an accountant at the end of the quarter. "I thought that since you have plans," she nodded at my hand, "and you're a team, maybe you could help close part of my treatment. After all," she smiled truly warmly, "we're a family now." And she pushed the folder closer. "It's written down here, what and how. It's nothing to worry about, just a gesture, as a keepsake." I felt the floor beneath my feet go down for a second like an elevator. Everything in my chest became funny, not from the humor, but from the absurdity of the scale. Here it is, the line that was whispered about yesterday. Here it is, his "I don't want problems," here it is. My nightstand on which the ring is no longer. "Mom," Jay said sharply, and Mom raised her eyebrows in mild surprise, a rare sign that she hadn't calculated one reaction. "That's wrong." He gulped. "This is my relationship, my decision, and my money. It's not we." "What do you mean, not us?" She was mildly surprised. "And what is we, if not support?" She looked at me. "You love him, right?" I closed my eyes for a second so as not to react reflexively, not to justify myself, not to agree, not to sacrifice a piece of myself for the sake of the world. I opened them and said, "Love is when everyone has their own wallet, their own head, and their own yes and no." I looked at Jay. "Say yours." He stood between us, a real front line. On one side, his usual, "Mom is right," on the other, his future, "We are building our own." He inhaled, exhaled, his shoulders straightened as if in a rank his voice became firmer. "No." The room became empty of sounds for a second, as if after clapping his hands, the agent with the suitcase coughed and buried his face in the papers. Mom didn't move. Only her fingers on the folder turned slightly white. "I understand," she said evenly. "Let's leave it as is." She closed the folder and, pretending to straighten the bedspread, looked into the nightstand. Empty. And then, for the first time, she looked straight at me. Not as an object from her system, but as a person who had come into the house and taken nothing but her own. "Are you going back to the motel?" she asked. "Or leaving?" "I'm leaving," I said, "but I'm not hiding." Jay took my backpack, Mom took the folder, the agent backed away like a man who accidentally walked onto the family stage of someone else's theater. We went down. Mom stopped at the door, as if she remembered something important, and took out of her pocket a velvet box. The same one, empty. She handed it to me. "Here," she said, "for memory." and she smiled her perfect little smile, which always left room for the next set of rules. And she turned slightly to Jay. Drop by tonight, son. The regiment is heavy. I looked at the box, at her hand, at home is where mom is on the door. And suddenly I realized that now my hook is not for the audience, but for myself. I picked up the empty box, turned to Jay, took the ring off my finger, not because I was filming myself, but because I wanted to hear his choice without the shock absorbers, and placed it between us on the palm of my hand. Tell me where to, now. I kept my voice even, on my hand in your pocket or back in the box. He looked at the metal as if it were a compass that showed 3 cardinal directions at once. Mom wasn't breathing. The air smelled of lavender from yesterday's candles and something iron, new. He stretched, and he stopped. He froze with his hand outstretched. His fingers almost touched the metal, but he didn't dare. And I suddenly understood. Here it is, his real front, not between me and my mother, but between the boy who is called and the man who names things himself. I didn't rush. I stood like a lighthouse. I don't run. I don't give in. I just stand and show the shore with my light. Not here. He finally exhaled and looked at me, guiltfully, scared, honestly. Then where? I asked. And when? I held his gaze until it stopped darting. He lowered his hand. Mom gently sucked in a breath, barely audible, but I heard she was used to pauses where silence decides everything. But this time, the silence was mine. Jay took the velvet box she held out, examined the emptiness, carefully closed the lid and put it back on the dresser, not next to Mom, not next to me, just on a flat surface. And then he lifted the ring from my palm and squeezed it in his fist. I won't hide it, he said, and I won't put it on now. I'll put it on tonight, in the place we choose. He turned to his mother. And also, I'll rent a studio in the city today, a small one, near the base, so we can relax, I and we. Not someday, but now. She smiled with that tiny movement of her lips that in her house replaced applause and slamming doors. Of course, she said, if it's more convenient. Pause. Just remember, tomorrow at 10 the clinic, at 12 the regiment. The repairman will fix the shelf, he interrupted calmly. I already called. They will come on Friday. I will arrange the insurance myself without agents at home. And we will make a visiting schedule too, so that you know when I am with you and when I am with my life. He inhaled. I love you, Mom. And I want to love not against someone but together. But together is not instead of. Her gaze became glassy, like that of shop windows that have been lit with a lamp for too long. Then the glass warmed up a little for a second. We'll see, she said. Time will tell. And she added very quietly to me, if you hold on, you're a good boy. We left. On the porch, the wind turned over the plastic violets in the flower pots. They slammed against the wall, then straightened out, absurdly, stubbornly. For the first time in days, I smiled easily. We didn't talk at the motel until the water had cleared the noise in my head. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to him take in air in the shower and let it out long, like he was breathing off schedule for the first time in a long time. He came out with wet hair, sat down next to me, laid his head on my shoulder. I'm scared, he admitted. I've never done this without looking back at her. Me too, I replied. But scared doesn't mean wrong. It's just a new road. He chuckled. You always talk like you have a compass inside you. I have a pier inside me, I said, and you have a compass. We found an online ad and called. Studio by the park, clean, unfurnished, said the voice. The art posters in the photo were hanging crookedly, but the light in the room was real. Daylight, not motel. We agreed on the morning. That night, the phone blinked again. Don't forget your mother, she wrote. I don't forget, I thought. I just remember myself. The morning was as clean as a new page in a notebook. We went to see the studio. The house turned out to be tired with a peeling staircase, but inside it smelled of wood and an open window. The window looked out onto a tiny park, 3 maples, a bench, a sandbox without children. In the corner there was a bare shelf, leaning on one screw. Can you handle it? Asked the owner, pointing to the shelf. Yes, answered Jay. I have golden hands. And for some reason, both the owner and I believed him. The contract was signed quickly. The keys are a light chill in any pocket. We stood in an empty white box and looked at each other as if it were already a house, although there is nothing in it yet except an echo. In the evening, I reminded him. He nodded. In the evening, he said, by your window. Until the evening, everything tried to return to its old channels. Mom wrote 3 times, documents, don't forget the soup, and in the evening, he answered briefly without reports, I did it, I'll be there tomorrow. His tomorrow always used to mean right now, just beautifully said. Now it suddenly became a real tomorrow. We bought a mattress, 2 chairs, and a lamp with a round shade, like the one in her living room, only without the flowers. When we were bringing boxes into the apartment, a neighbor with a dog said, new settlers, and smiled. I caught myself thinking that even a strange dog can become a witness to your new life. In the evening, we stopped by my place. To myself, in fact. My kitchen greeted us with a red light, a plush rag on the oven handle, and magnets with stupid slogans. My list hung on the refrigerator. Buy garlic, don't forget to give Dad a drill, pay for the internet. Ridiculous little things, but they smelled of freedom. He stood by the window, from where a piece of the city was visible. Roofs, antennas, other people's windows, in which someone was putting a mug, someone was petting a cat. He turned to me. May I? He asked, as if he was going to take my fear, not my hand. I have to, I answered. He took the ring from his pocket. No speech, no pause for dramatic effect. Just took my hand, dry, trembling, and put it on. The metal fell back into place, not as armor, as a sign that my finger had a memory. Don't take it off, he said. Even in her house? I asked, although I already knew the answer. Her house will have its own rules, but in my arms is mine. He smiled calmly for the first time, without a shadow of justification. We had dinner with what we had, laughed at the fact that there were 2 chairs and only 3 plates for now, stock for the future. And then he got his mother some, I'll come by tomorrow afternoon, he said. I'll bring groceries and a schedule that the therapist and I will draw up. When I'm with you, when I have work, when I live my life. Pause. I know you don't agree, but these are not negotiations. This is my responsibility. To myself and to you too. She answered something. The voice on the phone was quiet, huddled. He nodded several times, although she did not see. Then he finished. Love, good night. He hung up the phone, and there was no pride of victory on his face. There was relief and fear, like a man who swam across a river at night and is now standing on the other bank, shivering but already wet. That is, there is no point in going back anyway. The week was strange. Mom was silent, then wrote long messages, sometimes about an expired pack of sour cream, sometimes about neighbors who knock loudly, and sometimes suddenly, I didn't want to offend you. Sometimes these were obvious tests. The faucet is dripping again at 10 in the evening. He would answer, tomorrow at 2. And tomorrow at 2, he would come. Sometimes, I'm scared at night, at 1. He would write, we'll put in a nightlight and a sensor. I'll come in the morning. And in the morning, he would go and put it in and teach, turn it on like this. Together, we chose a nurse for her for a couple of hours a day, a woman with strong hands and a voice that makes tea hotter. Mom initially rejected, I don't need someone else's. Then she resigned herself. Let it be little by little. I knew this is not my victory. This is a life that can still be built without an emergency exit through a son. He lost his temper twice. He couldn't stand it. He went at night when she called him, I can't open a can. He came back pale, angry at himself. Not at her. At himself I didn't scold, I reminded him, we are building, not fighting. He nodded like a student who honestly copied and now wants to understand the topic himself. The studio slowly settled in. Books appeared on the crooked shelf. His war memoirs, my silly essay collections, 2 circles. Not Marwan Mom, just white ones. We hung a calendar above the table and scheduled our days and Mom's days. It seemed heavy until it became natural, like breathing, which you first count and then breathe without noticing the count. One evening he came with a package. He took out a candle from it, vanilla with lavender. I snorted, he laughed, so that there are no prisoners of symbols. Let them be ours. We lit a candle, and the smell was the same as hers, but not the same. Here it mixed with fried garlic and my shampoo. The house did not grumble, the house accepted. 3 weeks later, my mother called me herself. For the first time, her voice was cautious, as if she was treading on thin ice, I wanted to say. She hesitated. The shelf was fixed. Well, I was glad I did, I answered, and she paused. I have an extra saucepan. A big one, do you need it perhaps? I do, I said. Not because we can't live without the saucepan, because it was the first thing she was willing to give away without tying a string to it. We invited her to dinner with us, not as an exam, as part of the calendar. She came in a gray cardigan, brought the same pot and lasagna, by subscription from the internet. She looked around on the wall, a photo from the park where the leaves bend into boats on the table. 3 plates, 3 forks, 1 candle. Ours. She noticed the ring on my hand. A look, long but not prickly, cozy, she said. Not rich, he responded. That's not the point, she snapped, almost cheerfully. Cozy is when you're not shamed. And a second later, to me, don't be offended. I'm used to commanding where I'm afraid. It's a bad habit. We ate, talked about neutral things, about the neighbor's dog, the weather, the strange noise near the elevator. At some point, she finally tried. Jay, and tomorrow, can you bring my bills to the bank? He smiled. Exactly, I can on Thursday at 5. Tomorrow I have a day for myself. Got it. She nodded, and she didn't try again. As we walked her to the door, she paused in the hallway and looked at me. I was remembering your words. About the museum, a terribly offensive metaphor. She smiled. And terribly accurate. I don't want to live in a museum. Her fingers trembled slightly, as if they remembered all those times they called Jay. Habits are like old stitches, you know? You can't cut them in one motion. They're tightened, but you can soften them. Yes, you can. I agreed. I'm not in a hurry. Thank you, she said. And for the first time, her thank you didn't have a but or a smiley face. After she left, we were left in silence, good, alive. I took the pan off the stove, tapped the side with a wooden spoon. The sound echoed in the emptiness of the studio, like a bell. Very little Jay stood by the window and looked at the lights. Then he turned around. I sometimes think, he said, that I could have acted differently, softer or harsher or sooner. And every time I understand it's not correctly that's important, but finally. And further, I added, because finally is not the finish line, it's the start. He came up to me, touched my shoulder, looked into my eyes, without the usual don't be offended, without just don't be angry. He just looked, and I knew. Inside him now there were 2 voices, Mom's and his, not arguing but talking. Everyone has a time and a place. Tell me, he asked, that all this is not in vain. It's not in vain, I answered, even if we don't get to the wedding, even if one day we decide to separate. We've already done something important. We've learned to choose so that we both are in this choice. He hugged me, not as protection from, but as home to. Outside the window somewhere a truck clanked, sensors clicked at the entrance below, water gurgled in a saucepan. Life went on with its clinic at noon, regimen on Friday, bank on Thursday. And in this grid of affairs there suddenly became enough space for what we actually started all this for. To live, I stroked his neck, where the shadow of his watch strap always lay. He shuddered and smiled, like that first day at the coffee machine. Remember how you read the menu like it was an order? I asked. Now I have my own order, he replied. Breathe, choose, speak. He pressed his forehead to mine. And one more item, optional but desirable. What is it? Don't forget the candle. He nodded at our vanilla lavender, so that we won't be afraid of the smells of the past. We turned off the lights, leaving only the soft circle of the lamp. The shadows on the walls swayed like flags without wind. I watched the ring catch the reflections and thought that adulthood is not when you stop being afraid. It is when you stay, even if it is scary, and say out loud, what is yours? A couple of days later, we brought Mom a pot of soup in return, not as an exchange of penance, but as a normal human cycle. She accepted it, put it down, said, "Delicious." She didn't add a single condition. Then she asked to show her the schedule, not to make changes, but to know when to bake the pie. And I caught myself in a strange tenderness. It turns out that her "where is mine" can be translated into the language of "how can we be together?" And in the evening, we sat on our crooked shelf, now straight. He screwed in the second screw, and drank tea from white mugs and laughed at the fact that there were no children in the park again, only a dog with a neighbor and a girl with a skipping rope. Jay wrote 3 words on a small piece of paper, those very words, and stuck them on the refrigerator: "Breathe, choose, speak." "And to love," I added, "but not at the cost of myself." He nodded. "Never again," he said. "Not a vow, but a habit that is already changing shape." I ran my finger over the piece of paper, over the ring, over his hand. It was smooth inside. Not because everything had settled down, because there was room to move, without extra hands on the steering wheel. Home is where you are not asked to leave your heart at the door so as not to make you nervous. Home is where your yes is heard as clearly as your no. And if there is another love in this house, maternal, demanding, anxious, it can live here too, provided that everyone has their own keys and schedules, and that we are not a museum but a workshop. I looked at the lights outside the window, at our mugs at the shelf, at the piece of paper with short orders. And suddenly I clearly saw the final point of this story. Not loud, not cinematic. Small like a ring. And because of this, incredibly sufficient, we didn't leave, we talked and chose. And then we will confirm our choice with actions every day. And if someone ever asks again, "Where's Mini?" Zrenia, I'll smile and answer. Everyone will get theirs in their own time, on their own territory, and mine is already in place.